Do we have control of our light so you can see our slides?
That's a good question. I don't know. Our guy's going to get batteries real quicker. Is there a way to kill this cell phone too? This feels like this better. Oh, this is first time.
Yeah, we gotta knock these ones out and kill our slides.
Yeah, this is first step. Yeah. Good. Perfect. Thank you. Yes, that's good. Yeah.
We have downstate. Yeah, I live in.
It is such a pleasure.
Oh, is it? But I'll introduce you. And everyone else
Do we have more people coming out of chairs?
There's something we said for
We're gonna have some fun.
Thank you.
Do you want us to be in a special order?
No, I think this is fine. I'll go down the list of
Busy. I got a question for you. Yes. What? So the what now? Just yeah.
Okay, thank you guys for coming to Beyond Tools, Strategies for Aiding in Adaptation and Mitigation. I'm Alex Greer. I'm from the University of Albany from the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity here, and I'll be moderating this panel. This panel is looking at the tools that we can use to implement some strategies of mitigation we've been talking about throughout the week quite a bit, and really looking beyond those tools of how do we think about, we have all these tools, what are these different ways to implement mitigation, and how do we make them user-friendly for the local groups that want to implement them, and how do we pick between all these tools that we have. And we have a really great panel to talk about that today. So we have Kate Lawson. Kate is from here at Albany. She's an associate professor in geography and planning. We have Ellen McRae from NOAA Regional Climate Service Director. We have Michael Moriarty, Director of Region 2 Mitigation Division of FEMA. Joel Sharaga, the Senior Advisor for Climate Adaptation at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And Andrea Webster, the Implementation Manager at the Environmental Resilience Institute. So what we'll do is we'll have a few minutes of panelist remarks, ask them to prepare about 5 to 7 minutes of remarks. And as we get through those, I have some questions that we've discussed to talk about, and then we'll open up for questions and answers. So with that, we will start with Kate.
All right, thanks so much. Well, I really appreciate being able to be here on behalf of my research team at the Albany Visualization and Informatics Lab. We really want to express our appreciation for an opportunity to share our research on how to make data actionable so we can get to those solutions that we need. So just a quick, oh my gosh, where do I have this point? Okay. All right. Oh, this could work too. So just a quick introduction. So most people know about data science, where we have folks, and I like to call them mathematicians. They can take huge quantities of data and do data mining techniques and find something. So we've taken at Vail, we've taken an applied data science approach. And so what we do is we use the same tools, the application programming interfaces, all of the types of algorithms that are available in data science, but we use them in a purposeful way because we know what questions our decision makers are trying to answer, and so that's the direction that we go. And with that insight as to how to use those tools, we work with the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services here in the state of New York because they had an incredible need. They had so much amazing data, so many questions they needed to answer, and so using applied data science seemed like a really good fit. And so what we did is we produced the first hazard mitigation plan based on the information from a previous plan, which is to say our previous plans were hard copy, and although they may have had soft parts of them, they all ended up in a PDF, and that made it very difficult to rearrange and understand what you could know based on what had come out in that book. So what we did as applied data scientists is we took all of the pieces of information and turned them into discrete data points. Once you do that, everything becomes fluid. Everything becomes available to you so that you can actually start doing planning in a different paradigm. So we had to have our partners because they knew what it was that they were on mission for, and we had FEMA, we had our New York State agencies, and we had some of our great resources here at the university with our new College of Homeland Security Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity, and we were able to jump in fairly quickly. Now, this had to be quick because we got this project in the late part of spring, and we had to deliver a FEMA-approved plan by the December 18th of 2018, because without an approved plan, if anything happens, you don't get any resources. So this was the most intense planning experience that I've had, but we had such great partners because they also understood how intense this was. So what we needed to be able to do is take the hazard mitigation plan and include all of the pieces of it so we could get to actions. That's the key thing that's been a problem before. Too much time messing around with data, too much time not being able to get down to the point, which is being able to get something done before the next event. So we use the standardized available data in these large data sets using our data science tools so we can instantaneously access, mix, visualize, and analyze all of these data. So you have to get your mind out of an Excel spreadsheet and just believe us, we have the tools, we can do it. And what we were able to do was take all of the parts of a hazard mitigation plan, so all of your hazard profiles, all of your exposures, all of your values, all of your information about your annualized damage. Any information that exists in data science can be mixed, matched, and reviewed in different ways. And so it made it possible for decision makers to answer questions that they had. So that's the way that we addressed what we did first, which was the state plan, and now becomes importantly, how do you deal with the local plan integration? So the approach here was to do the same thing, but this time we had different data. This time we had building footprints from OpenStreetMaps and Microsoft building footprint set, an amazing data set. We had all the parcel data for the state of New York. We had our HASTIS flood scenarios. We had the Army Corps of Engineers flood depth damage curves, and we were able to provide new tools that allow you to edit buildings and parcel attributes, start your mitigation action, the project you need to do, and then provide the data loss or the hazard loss data for your assets and your parcels so that you can know what's happening at the very local level. So the same tool trajectory that we used for the state plan, now is available for locals. So what that means is, if you're in a location and you run your HASTAS model to find out what the impact of a 100-year, 500-year flood, you get to choose which one you want to look at, it will provide us with that information instantaneously, but then we peel off that HASTAS information, and below are the set of buildings that are impacted with all of the information about each building that came from the vast amount of local data, the administrative data that's already been prepared by the state of New York. Then you're able to spring forward and start doing your actions. So inside of the tool is a way to say, now I want to add customized data, I want to do special projects, but it all ties back to that same data stream. So you end up with a huge volume of data that has that same ability to be analyzed, which way you want to look at it. In addition, one of the things that we find most exciting is we can also digitize the capabilities and be able to track the capabilities. So what type of staff did you have available? What type of resources did you have available? And in fact, if you need funding, there's also a link inside of the springing mechanism that tells you here's where you can find more funding for that particular need. So now that you have all this data, over time, over space, it will self-aggregate. So you'll be able to do analysis of any time period, and you will be able to look at any set of players, which then makes it possible to connect up everything that's happening at the local level with everything that's happening at the state, because the data flows in that direction. So it's going to allow the state, they have their plan approved, now their plan is growing every day with all the new information that's being assembled across all the different players in the state. And so we're about to try this out in the real world, because the thing about academia is we got to get on the ground, we got to make sure it works. So we're going to be doing a pilot with 4 counties. We're going to be giving them these tools to use in their day-to-day work. They're going to be giving us excellent feedback on what works and what doesn't work, and most importantly, what question are they trying to answer. So it's open source. We are cooperating technical partners with FEMA now, so we see this as being available to all of our counties here in New York and any county that wants to join us. Okay.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, you guys, and good morning again. So I read this as beyond the tools, because last night we heard that there were so many tools that it was important to figure out how all of these things get disseminated and how folks can actually understand what tools they're being given. So I think what you'll hear is everybody has tools, but here's a little bit on why, at least in terms of the NOAA perspective. So NOAA recognized years and years ago that there's a rising demand for information at all different scales. And from my remarks last night, you could hear that I was talking about our partnerships at the national scale, but also the importance of driving information down from the national to the regional to the local scales. And the reason for that is our mission-driven work in NOAA towards what we call science, service, and stewardship. The 3 tenets of NOAA's mission have to do with continuing the basic research, which a lot of you guys are involved in, but also a central core of our work is to make sure that we have the service delivery arm, the user engagement arm. I sometimes have a slide, I think I put it in here, that talks about that. But our mission is also topical. NOAA's primary audiences is another way that you can map to the different agencies about who are they serving. And we primarily look at coastal communities and their resilience, both fishing communities and coastal communities generally. That work is done mostly through our Sea Grant programs, which are coastal but also inland. We have a few of those. We look at it in terms of climate extremes. NOAA houses all of the data that are being cited by all of these folks. The National Centers for Environmental Information is actually my home office based in Asheville, North Carolina. and it is the Center for Climate and Weather Information. It's also the Center for Coast, Oceans, and Geophysical Data. Any data that are gathered by all of you have a metadata process and a process by which we call send to NCEI, which is a way of moving all of your data into our platforms for broader access. So I really want to cite that because we're spending a lot of time on our big data initiative in NOAA, taking a look at how those data are accessible and useful and usable and used. So all three of those pieces, okay? Are the data useful? Are they usable? Can you even find them? And if you find them, are you actually using them? And we're hoping that you'll apply this information to a variety of different sectors that I've listed here, which makes it oh so much fun to look at all of the cross-sectoral work. So the lingo on services is really, I did put this slide in because I love it, because it's like, okay, there are all these different ways to say what we do. So it's, are we user-driven, use-oriented, use-inspired, problem-focused, information for decision makers, partnerships, the user. What about co-production of information, actionable science, decision support services? You hear all of these things within the ecosystem of service delivery. And what we're finding is even when I moved from the U.S. Geological Survey as a scientist over to NOAA to think about services, NOAA said, we don't do raw science like the NSF type science. We do products and services. Well, then just last year when I started looking at service delivery across our agency, I realized, oh my goodness, even weather service versus the ocean service inside NOAA have different definitions of what we mean by services. We have some work to do. So what we started to do was build a NOAA level service delivery framework, and this is where a lot of you guys will fit in. This is where the ecosystem of service delivery comes together. And what you'll find is, ages ago in the climate service, we looked at this as the user in the middle and the partnerships around the outside. This was independently created by my Sea Grant colleagues down in Mississippi and Alabama. And they never had seen what we called the pearl before. It was interesting when we called it the pearl, and the user said, why are we the irritant in the middle of the pearl? And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. So as we started building out this service delivery model, this is the same thing showed up, and that was that we really have a need to engage with the users on the ground. That's really where NOAA's strength lies, is the ecosystem, as I mentioned last night, of knowing and engaging with the partners. I can use the word wicked in a sentence because I'm from New England, okay? So, and that's important when you're engaging with users because this stuff is wicked awesome, all right? But we have to be able to say that from the perspective of the community. I lived there, I know these people, Sea Grant folks know these people, regional climate centers know these people. So it's really about who has that trusted partnership. So this is a little bit about who those folks are at the different scales for NOAA. So we have national scale science at the bottom. Okay, NOAA operates national programs. You guys are maybe the beneficiaries of national programs. Nationally, we have other tools and resources, like the National Climate Assessment. Anybody read that? So in NOAA's mandate, every 4 years, we're the ones that have to stand in front of Congress if it doesn't get done every 4 years. This is a cross-agency initiative. I was the regional author for the Northeast, which goes from West Virginia up to Maine. We had 8 of us, around the country, and then there were 200 and some odd authors for the national assessment. But a critical tool for all of you to examine both figures that can be downloaded, information, interpretable science that was done. But in addition to the National Climate Assessment, the other work that's done at the national level are the data centers that I mentioned. But also the Climate Resilience Toolkit. I don't have a ton of slides on the Climate Resilience Toolkit because it's really a touchy-feely thing. You've got to get in it on your website and look at it and be able to see that this was designed across all of the federal agencies with tabs on topics like energy and transportation and public health. And not only was it done by topic, so there was what we called no wrong way in. You could pull it in by topic, or you could say, I don't care what Alaska did for a case study, I live in New York. So you want to click on the Northeast tab and go in regionally and see where you are geographically. So you can go in by topic, you can go in by geography, you can go in on case studies. If you want to go through the 5 steps to resilience and you're working your way through assessing your vulnerabilities all the way to taking action, there are tools and methods in each of those 5 steps for the toolkit, done nationally and cross-agency. I would be remiss if I didn't mention for the coastal communities, NOAA's Digital Coast. Looking at sea level rise scenarios, again looking at county by county level snapshots of the vulnerability against sea level rise and coastal storms. So all of these things built nationally, but built for the perspective of regional to local issues. The regional scale partnerships include the Regional Climate Center. For this area, it's held at Cornell University on a long-term 25-year-long relationship with NOAA to move the data from the National Centers for Environmental Information to the regional and local scale. If you want a graph that says how your town has warmed up, you can write to the Regional Climate Center and they will send you a graph directly out of our site. You can also go to the national work called Climate at a Glance. If you just Google Climate at a Glance, you can do the same thing for yourself. And Google and make an XY plot for your town based on the observations taken by NOAA's National Weather Service, archived at the data centers nationally, and produced in regional scales by the Regional Climate Center. That's the cascading way that we move our data and information to you locally. So again, user engagement is the foundation, and I've got to figure out a way that you can actually read all the lines here, all right? But essentially it is about nurturing relationships from the foundation, building a timely response. It's not just about gathering requirements and what your needs are. I mean, I'm sure many of you have had to articulate your needs to federal agencies, but it's about being able to go back to the agency to turn the crank and deliver a response to you. Okay, so that's really where we're moving in our service delivery arm to understand the needs and be able to translate them into action by the agency. That's done, like I said, geographically, but it's also done by sector, and these are some of the main areas that we focus. Our core, of course, is the delivery of water level information from our national water model, as well as on both too much water, too little water, too salty water, too freshy water. Okay, so we have, I like to say, we're looking at floods, we're looking at drought, we're looking at riverine systems, and we're also looking at the impacts of storms on the coast. So that's really our realm when it comes to water and coast. We also do it on time scales, like I said, with the weather forecast offices at the near term, hours, days, weeks to seasons, and then the climate time scale, seasons and beyond. So if you're looking at planning ahead, you would look at NOAA's climate information. If you're looking at building bridges, roads, highways on your 30-year time scale. But if you're also looking at what are we supposed to do in terms of patterns of storms, impacts from severe storms, that's in our weather realm. So we're crossing time scales, geographic scales, topical scales, and we're delivering these tools through through the Climate Resilience Toolkit and also through Digital Coast. We try to consolidate most of our information that way, and then there are additional resources in those pieces that I'm happy to talk to you about. So that's it.
Good morning. I'm Mike Moriarty. I save lives, protect property, and preserve the environment. I'm the Director of Mitigation for FEMA, but that's the way we introduce ourselves, our Hemingway 6 words or less to get the message across. And what we really focus is just trying to get things done, making sure that the planning and the teamwork that we talked about in the room just prior occurs before disaster hits, right? So I spent about 15 to 20 years now working on Puerto Rico issues, either with the Coast Guard or with FEMA, and have become familiar with specific issues. So I want to get a sense of who in the room's from New York? And then how about the Caribbean? Very good. And then a small smattering of outside of New York. So we know the whole 2017 hurricane season was pretty much stretched the federal capability, with Harvey first hitting Houston, devastating that area, and then Irma coming through, catching one of the Virgin Islands, a quarter of Puerto Rico, and then really hit Florida, right? So the resources that we had, and CONUS deployed to Harvey, and then deployed to Florida. So when Maria was coming, it was really less than the full amount of resources that were available, but it was a heavy military focus, right? So we had, because one, it was hard to get there, the airports were closed. We had to get there by sea after we cleared the sea routes and the harbors. So it was a heavy military presence early on, but it was a huge federal response, historic in many ways. So as we know, power was out in Puerto Rico, at least 3 million people for the first 3 months without power. We installed over 2,000 generators during that time, which kept the lights on in the critical areas, critical infrastructure. That's more generators, twice as many as we had installed in Katrina, and more than all the other disasters of that year combined. So it was a pretty significant lift. Again, the air mission, just flying water and food around the island, 62 days. Was over almost 5,000 sorties. So that's a massive amount of resource to do that. We can only do that with the military. We'll never be able to do that with our civilian response. And it was 73 million liters of water, 63 million meals, 38,000 patients through our disaster medical hospitals that were set up. So that's a huge response. But what did we know about before the event? How did the plans play out in reality? And that's the concern. So I love Puerto Rico. It's a beautiful, charming place. And the charm is because it is informal and it's natural. And I think somewhat pedestrian, it's very friendly, right? But for those same reasons, there's a lot of risk. And the risk comes from the lack of formality that we deal with. And some of the things that we have to deal with on a regular basis is the political system. There's a changeover of staff resources. Whenever there's a new governor, the entire staff usually cleans house and new people come in. So it's almost every 4 years or so, we're starting from scratch. So even though the plans that we worked in those hard-fought meetings, for 4 years, you're almost starting from scratch every 4 years with a new team who wants to do things differently in their way. And that's one of the things that really has to have focus of change as we go forward. Because we know, even though it is a great place to be, and there's a wonderful population. When I was down there, I went down after Irma, so I was there for Maria and for the few months after Maria, and traveled the island, and people were in desperate situations without power and without water in many cases. But you know what? There was to a person that I spoke to, they say, look, we live on a Caribbean island, and we know we have storms, and we know there's issues, and they plowed through, and they weren't blaming anybody or anything, but we have to do better. So this is what we do going forward. It's a high-risk environment, right? So it's not just tropical storms and hurricanes, right? As someone mentioned, that there's the Puerto Rico Trench. On both sides of Puerto Rico, we have trenches, so we have earthquake risk and tsunami risk. And it rains an awful lot. I'd be there on a Saturday afternoon, and you get 10 inches of rain, so you have fluvial flooding all the time that don't amount to disasters, but you have a lot of washed out roads and mudslides. So there's an awful lot of risk that we don't capture just in the way of hurricane planning. So I think when I read the 2018 workshop summary, there was 2 questions that they said. They said, how might the collective neglect of Puerto Rican communities post-hurricane be remedied in the future? And how can universities and community members share knowledge to join together to find sustainable, resilient solutions? So I'm good with all of that, I think, except for the the collective neglect part of that description. I don't really think that there is or was a collective neglect. There's an awful lot of challenges that we have to deal with in Puerto Rico, and that's where we hope universities can engage. I think you heard Catherine talk just at the opening of this section, talk about some of the partnerships we have with SUNY from FEMA Region 2. And those partnerships form great data collection, data analysis, and then the infusing of that data down to the local level. So some of the things that we need to do in Puerto Rico immediately, because no matter how much money we put into it from the federal government, there's basic foundational things that have to be done in order for it to be truly effective. So we think of Puerto Rico as another state, and in our method of federalism in this country, the federal government, we go in and we view with respect the state's authority. So no matter what state it is, we go in and the state always calls the shots. And the federal government supports to try to make those decisions occur. And we respect local expertise. So if we're working with a municipality or county, we respect that local knowledge and try to leverage that to better solutions. But the decisions, it's not the federal government making decisions for the residents of that community or that state or that commonwealth. So that's part of the challenge. And some of the things that we deal with, I will tell you, the biggest challenge that I see in Puerto Rico from working there all the time is the informal construction. It was mentioned earlier on in the plenary session. So informal construction means structures are built without building codes, without inspections, and people just put up structures. So there may be a concrete one-story house and they'll build a second-story addition out of plywood, right? But not to any code or standard. And then the mother-in-law lives in that second floor. So when 155 or 185 mile-an-hour winds come, the first thing that goes down is not the concrete structure, but the plywood structure on the second floor, right? And that's across the island, right? And there's structures in the interior of the island where there's very steep slopes, and they're built on stanchions that I would estimate 20 to 30 feet. They build boxes and they pour concrete and they build stanchions, and the house is built with about 1% of the house actually touching land and 95 to 99% of the structure on stanchions. None of this is inspected. And there's rules in Puerto Rico that if you build a structure and you don't have power, and it was built without inspections or a certificate of occupancy, PREPA has to connect power to it. So there's almost an incentive to build informally because you're going to get the power connected. Anywhere else, if that occurred, you would never have power, water, or any of the services that would connect. So it's that fundamental